these bands that had string sections and synthesizers
Just
and and flew
overprocessed.
around in jets and
Yeah.
played stadiums.
Hi, I'm Elyssa Lovelyss. This is Videowave. I'm here today with Jim Testa, the editor of Jersey Beat fanzine, which can be found online at jerseybeat.com. Tell us how you got started.
Thanks, Alyssa. Well, way back in the early 80s, I had just gotten out of college at Rutgers and actually wasn't really intending to be a music journalist. I was writing a lot about film and theater for a local paper called The Aquarian. And a friend of mine that I went to college with had moved to Washington, D.C. and started his own fanzine. And he had different people do music columns from around the country, like L.A., Minneapolis. And I started doing one from New Jersey because there was a lot of music happening in Hoboken at the time where I was living. And I called it Jersey Beat, which was a pun on Mersey Beat, which was something that goes back to the Beatles. But anyway, long story short, my friend had to stop doing his fanzine, and I was having so much fun doing this column that I spun it off into my own fanzine, and that was the beginning of Jersey Beat. That was 1982.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a print fanzine, completely, DIY, do it yourself. Sold money to record labels and whatnot for advertising that paid for the printing. We gave it out at shows and sold it at record stores and had some distribution. And the 80s, the fanzine underground before the internet was a very important way that a lot of underground music, was, from Husker Du to the Replacements to all the bands on SST and all those great labels. It was, this sort of small little hand to mouth, word of mouth underground, and the fanzine thing was part of that. And eventually, over the years, because of doing that, my name got out there, and I was able to freelance for bigger magazines. I got to write for Rolling Stone and Guitar World. And then in the 2000s, we started a website back in the early days of dial-up modems and whatever, just a very, very crude, mostly text website, just as a kind of online advertisement for the print fanzine. But then as it became more and more difficult to do the print, we say we're living in the world of dead tree media. They've just like Spin magazine looks like it's on its last legs.
Right.
It just gets harder to harder. Advertising dries up, circulation dries up. So it became more and more difficult. So about 2006 or so, I stopped printing the magazine, and it just became a web magazine. I don't like to call it a music blog because I think it's a little bit more than that. Yeah. We do reviews, of course, but we do live. We go to shows, we cover that, photos from the scene, interviews with bands, and so forth. So now we're online, jerseybeat.com, and 30 years on, still going.
You've kept the same formula throughout the whole
Pretty
time?
much, yeah, pretty much. We'll write about something mainstream if it's, something we think our readers are really interested in. But mostly it's bands, local bands, or bands that, that we really like coming up. And then, sometimes local bands become mainstream bands, like Gaslight Anthem. As a band now that's touring and playing stadiums around the world, and I first saw them in a basement in New Brunswick, playing in front of a bunch of kids. So that process kind of goes on and repeats itself.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any certain reason you don't allow comments on your website?
No, the only reason I don't allow comments is because it's old HTML Web 1.0.
Okay.
What I would like to do eventually, when I can either raise the money or find a very generous web designer, is to move it over to a format like WordPress or something where you can have comments and make it more interactive, make it more Web 2.0. But for right now, really the only reason that we don't have comments is just because of the technology, because it's just a straight HTML website that I can go in on the fly and update, add text to. But I just really don't have the wherewithal right now to do that.
What do you think about the hardcore music today in difference to the 80s?
Well, the hardcore scene's really interesting. Jersey Beat was around, we started in 1982, which is about when hardcore started. Hardcore started on the West Coast when kids invented slam dancing and stage diving. And, that stuff was all today it's so much part of teen culture. It's almost like joining
just a regular.
going to a show and doing your first stage dive is like joining the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
It's become
Rite of
sort of
passage
it's
kind of
become a rite of
thing.
passage for kids. But at the time, that all had to be invented.
Yeah.
So it started on the West Coast. It slowly came to the East Coast. We were right there when it started. There was a Jersey band called Adrenaline OD, who were one of the first really good Jersey hardcore bands, who were good friends of mine. So I wrote about them quite a bit. And I went to shows and somehow amazingly never got my neck broke. But but mosh pits back then, I'm telling you, that wasn't like today.
Yeah.
But the big difference is that hardcore started out almost as a reaction to. Punk started out as a reaction to the overindulgence and the excess of, the Led Zeppelins and the ELOs, all these bands that had string sections and synthesizers
Just
and, and
overprocessed.
flew around in jets and
Yeah.
played stadiums. And the punk movement was like, no, we're going to do it in our local bar,
Right.
guitars
very
and drums
casual
and
and-
1, 2, 3, 4, and
Yeah.
make it real simple and strip it down. But if you look at that first generation of bands, the Ramones, Blondie, Talking Heads, those guys were all in their late 20s when they started, and hardcore was kind of like the kids, the teenagers saying, "No, man, we want our own scene," and it was faster and louder and way more aggressive, and it was just sort of like this complete, outpouring of teenage angst and energy and resentment, and all those early hardcore bands, Dead Kennedys and Black Flag, it was all about just anger and aggression and hormones and testosterone and getting in the
Just
pit and
getting
beating
it.
the crap out of everybody. And you look at the hardcore scene today, and the weird thing is to me is that it's all the same bands. It's like all these guys in their 40s and 50s singing these youth anthems that they wrote when they were 19 and 20.
Yeah.
And the young kids today, there's no room for them. You look at the bands that are touring today or the big hardcore shows, and it's all reunions and reissues of old records, and it's a weird situation, but it's not something I'm terribly happy with. I kind of wish the old guys would kind of move out of the way and give the kids their scene back.
Really?
Yeah, really. I'm sure. There are still young bands. There are still basement shows. I'm sure there are a lot of kids who have no idea what I'm talking about. But overall, if you just look at pick up the paper and pick up the Village Voice and look at the hardcore shows coming to town, it's it's Agnostic Front, and it's the Dead Kennedys were just in town again.
Yeah.
Without Jello Biafra, but a band called the Dead Kennedys. But it's like a lot of those old bands are still, still together and still playing and kind of like hogging the scene for themselves. And, it's just a weird situation.
You consider it hogging?
Well, I don't know if it's hogging. I guess, they certainly earned the right to be there. But
Or you think it's time to pass the torch?
but I think I would like to see, if not pass the torch, at least allow a little room. You make a bill that's 50-50.
Right.
Give the younger bands
Just
a
more
little bit of
diverse
chance
and-
to get in the spotlight.
Yeah.
But it really seems like right now there's no room for that,
Yeah.
which is kind of a crazy situation.
What do you think about the music scene in general in Brooklyn and Williamsburg, that whole area?
Well, it's kind of weird, as the music industry, the major label structure has kind of self-destructed over the last 10 years, in large part because of the internet and file sharing, and obviously has had a huge impact. But I think it's also just kind of a reaction to the fact that the means of making music have become so much more accessible. You don't have to spend $1,000 today in a big studio
Right.
to make a record. You can do it at home
your
on your
phone.
laptop.
Exactly.
It's really kind of amazing. Some of the best music that I've been writing about lately come from laptop studios.
just very lo-fi.
Very low budget, very do-it-yourself. So with the means of production, and you don't have to press 1,000 CDs. You can just put your MP3s up on Bandcamp or
Just
Reverb Nation or your own website,
make it
and
downloadable.
reach as many people as you used to be able to reach going through the record store network. So it's leveled the playing field in a lot of ways. It's very hard to generalize about the music scene.
Right.
Even if you're talking about New York and what's going on in Williamsburg and Bushwick, I love the fact that there is such a DIY scene there, that there are kids creating their own all ages spaces.
Yeah.
You have places like Shea Stadium and Death by Audio, Market Hotel, and all these places, that the kids are putting on their own shows and kind of working outside the traditional bar over 21 network. And then there's also, the whole fact that the blogosphere has become so important, and sites like Pitchfork have so much influence. And so you do get a lot of kids moving to New York, to Brooklyn specifically, from, Ohio or
Right, they see
Iowa or whatever.
going on.
Right, yeah, they see there's something. Well, they not only see there's something going on, but they see an opportunity there to establish themselves as a quote-unquote Brooklyn band, get their MP3s to Pitchfork, get written about, and all of a sudden you're playing Coachella and whatnot. And so there's a lot of, on the one hand, you've got this wonderful DIY scene that's all about having fun and creating music for its own sake. And on the other hand, you've got this very careerist, ambition-driven sort of flavor of the month cycle that we go through with the social media, and that's maybe a little bit more distressing. But it's all part of the same deal. I mean, you probably can't have one without the other.
This is true.
Yeah.
Do you have some South by Southwest stories?
South by Southwest. Yeah, I have a lot of. I started going to South by Southwest in 1989. I think it was the third one. So I got to see it grow from a very small, intimate little, thing in Austin to this major international music festival. And a lot of people complain about South by Southwest that it's gotten too big for its
All the
own good,
locals, yeah.
and all the focus is on the buzz bands. But to me, it's like Tom Lehrer said, life is like a sewer. What you get out of it depends on what you put into it. So if you go to South by Southwest thinking that all you're going to do is stand online and see Odd Future or Lana Del Rey or whoever the buzz of the week is, then yeah, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
But if you just go with a sense of discovery and look in all the little nooks and crannies and the corners, you're going to find
You're
going to be surprised, and you're going to find some wonderful things.
Right.
One of my favorite stories was years ago. A friend of mine who was a publicist said, I have this band, their record's not out yet, it's coming out in the fall, but you have to go see them, you're going to love them. The lead singer is a music writer, just like you, but he started a band. And it was Harvey Danger. And it was before, anyone had ever heard of them.
Yeah.
So I went to see Harvey Danger, and they did, Flagpole Sitter, and they were they're a great band, and I really enjoyed it. And then right after them, the next band on that, it was actually in a tent. The next band in the tent was this scraggly little lonely kid, this teenager, with a little beat-up acoustic guitar. And I said, well, that looks interesting.
Yeah.
And he performed, and he just blew my mind. It was like, oh, my God. I mean, I think this kid's going to commit suicide before I get the chance to see him again. He was just so
Distraught.
soulful, but so sorrowful and so moving. And it was Connor Oberst, and he was 16 years old. It was the first time Bright Eyes had ever come to South by Southwest.
Oh, wow.
So completely by accident, I got to discover him.
Got lucky.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's one of the things I'll never forget. And I bought. I mean, he had already had like 3 or 4 CDs out, that he was putting. I bought everything he owned. I came back to the guy I was sharing my hotel with and said, "Stop what you're doing. I'm gonna take my Walkman out. We have to listen to this. You have to hear this right now."
Yeah.
And then I've been a big fan of his ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What are the most recent albums you've bought?
Let me think. I don't go to the store and buy a lot of CDs anymore, but I subscribe to eMusic.
Okay.
So I legally get things that way. And what have I been listening to lately? Purity Ring,
Okay.
Passion Pit. Those are really good new albums, kind of on the buzz tip. There's a young band from New Jersey that no one's heard of yet called Boxed Wine. That I just downloaded their EP from Bandcamp. Absolutely
What
in
kind
love
of
with
music
it. They're like a power pop band.
Okay.
If I had to compare them to someone that you've heard of, maybe Fountains of Wayne.
Okay.
A little bit like that.
So really catchy.
Really catchy, really sing along, clever lyrics, really great melodies, wonderful harmonies. Old fashioned virtues, stuff the Beatles were doing. Stuff you want to sing along to.
Just keep it
great,
simple.
great choruses, exactly. But really talented, and they're all like early 20s, super talented kids. So,
What's the connection between punk rock and singer-songwriters?
what?
It's a very
Wow, that's an interesting. Well, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that a lot of old punks are becoming singer-songwriters.
Right.
A lot of the guys who have been in bands for years, it's hard keeping a band together. I mean,
It
you've
is.
got
Everybody's
four or
had the same
five people in a
mindset.
van. I say being in a band is like being married to 4 or 5 people at the
It
same
really
time,
is.
and you know how many marriages fail.
Right.
So it's not surprising the bands break up. So you've got a lot of these guys like Chuck Reagan, Dave House, who have been in, bands like Hot Water Music or whatever.
Right.
And as they get, in their 30s and 40s, they're probably married, have a couple of kids, it's like,
The perspective changes.
yeah,
a little
I
bit.
need another way that I'm going to make a little bit more money and not have all this overhead.
Yeah.
So they get out the acoustic guitar and they start becoming singer-songwriters. And I think, what do they have in common? Well, a good song is a good song, whether it's full-on roaring distortion guitar. One of the favorite shows I ever saw was back Soul Asylum from Minneapolis was
I love
a
Soul
band
Asylum.
I liked, and their records were always very loud,
Yeah,
full of
very raw
distortion, and they had a little lull in their career. So Dave Perner and the guitar player decided, in between Soul Asylum records, they did a tour where they just went out with acoustic guitars and they played all their Soul Asylum songs acoustically,
Yeah.
and you could actually hear the melodies and the lyrics.
Yeah.
And I was like, they played Maxwell's,
They're on
Mud
YouTube.
Wall.
A lot of those videos.
Yeah, and I'm like, I never realized what awesome songs these are. I mean, they sound really good
Yeah.
when you hear them on the radio, but like when you really listen to the lyrics, they're such awesomely well-written songs.
They're not hiding behind the distortion.
Yeah,
It's easy
behind
to tell.
all the guitars. So, I think that's your connection there.
Right. Can you describe your fascination with Gene Shepard?
Well, when I was a kid, I don't know, people know who everyone knows who Gene Shepard is because he's the guy who wrote A Christmas Story, the movie that we see every year at Christmas
Right.
about the little boy who wants the BB gun. However, that's not what he was principally, that's what he's best known for to the public.
Right.
But for many, many years, he did a show on WR Radio that was quite unlike anything anybody does today. He didn't play records, he didn't have guests, he didn't do interviews. He just got on the radio for 45 minutes a night and told stories about growing up, about being in the Army, about living in New York. He did stand-up, he did commercials, he did other things. Later on, he did some TV shows for PBS. But Gene Shepard is remembered as this American humorist. He wrote short stories which were collected into books. Many of those stories were collected into the movie A Christmas Story. Like remember the leg lamp
Yeah.
that the old man wins. That was one of the stories. The BB gun was one of the stories. Scott Farkas the bully,
Yeah.
that Ralph beats up in the snow. That was one of the stories. So I grew up. I just when I was like really young, like middle school, freshman in high school, I listened to this guy every night, and he was just a big influence on me. So I wrote a song about him called Gene Shepard, and I think, in terms of my writing, people always say, who were you influenced by? And people always think, well, Lester Bangs, the famous rock critic, or Hunter Thompson. No, I think Gene Shepard is like my single biggest influence.
Inspiration comes from the weirdest places.
Yeah.
sometimes. How do you think his marriage to Lois Nettleton affected his work?
That's an interesting question because I don't really think he did. He was a solo on the radio. He actually, Lois Nettleton was this actress, did a bunch of TV shows, didn't have much of a career. I don't think Lois Nettleton really affected his career that much. He was another woman that he became, after he divorced Lois Nettleton, a woman named Lee Brown, that was his producer for many years. And after he stopped doing the radio show in the 80s, he did a couple of really amazing television series for PBS, one of which was called Gene Shepard's America, where he would go around to different parts of the country and talk about the food. This is years before Alton Brown and like any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But he was, he would talk about like regional food, regional cooking, or weird national monuments.
Yeah.
I remember this one show he went to Alaska, and he stood in the tundra, surrounded by nothing but snow and ice and polar bears, and he looked down at his feet, and there was an empty beer can in the middle of the snow. And he looked into the camera and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is America." So I don't know. That was Gene Shepard.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jim Testa, for being on Videowave. I'm Elyssa Lovelyss. You can check out jerseybeat.com, and thanks for watching.